Thank you, Antoine, for the introduction, and thanks for the organizers of the Heritage Horizon Project Week that we can present the bias just to meet the audience expectations. I know we are here in a session about AI, but the focus of our session today will be more about community engagement and capacity building because community engagement is really at the heart and the core of our project. But our colleague from the KU Leuven, Fred Truyen, will talk about in the afternoon at the panel more about how we use AI and bias. So this is the agenda for today. So we have, it's a rather quite long workshop. I will do a brief introduction to the project. Then we will have a first roundtable moderated by Jonas von Mulder from the Catholic University of Leuven, I guess, not Leiden. Sorry for that. The speakers will be Asli Özgen-Havekotte from the University of Amsterdam. They have been working with the colleagues from Sound and Vision. She's been working with the colleagues of Sound and Vision. Then Dani Martiri from Queering Rome. He was one of the community partners for the LGBTQA topic we are dealing with in the bias. Then Kat Sommers from the Photo Museum Antwerp and Rosita Atanasova from the British Library. Afterwards, after the break, then we have an interactive session together with it's moderated by Corinne, Kerstin Arnold. So I will start, as I said, with a short presentation of the project so that you know a bit the setup. Some key facts and figures. So we are funded by the Digital Europe program, and we are almost done with our project. It ends December 24. The overall goal is to have a more inclusive and respectful approach to describing cultural heritage. Our focus is Europeana, so the tool that we are developing will integrate it into Europeana. And our consortium consists of 11 partners from the wider Europeana network. The project partners, so we are mainly Europeana aggregators. So all in all, we provide more than 6 million records on which we have tested the tool. Then we have the Catholic University of Leuven, who is responsible for the academic research. We have two technical partners, ThinkCode and Datoptron. ThinkCode is mainly responsible for developing the bias detection tool. Datoptron has helped us with adapting the Cloud Heritage platform to do the validation. Ecom is a partner with huge expertise in management. And of course, we have also Europeana as a partner. Sorry, I was too quick. When we drafted the proposal, we had some initial questions. So how do problematic terms and stereotypes appear in collection databases? These concerns emerged as we realized the importance of updating outdated languages and object descriptions and archival databases. As more data become publicly available, as you know, the challenges for archives is immense. Many content description keywords are outdated, problematic, contentious, and because they were created decades ago or because they represent a very Eurocentristic Western perspective. And updating these terms is, of course, not an easy endeavor due to the vast size of these collections. Therefore, our approach was to develop a tool and a solution that supports us in detecting, flagging these terms, contextualizing them. And Of course, this is a task that cannot be done by the project's partner alone. So we are heavily dependent on the collaboration with the communities, and also we ask the question ourselves the questions how that could occur on an equal footing. So as I said, the overall goal was then to develop solutions for a more inclusive and respectful description of cultural heritage. These are our goals, and as we are already finishing the project, also our achievements. So we have built a tool that detects and flags problematic terms in Europeana, but also other archival databases. We have created a vocabulary of contentious terms with contextualization and, if appropriate, also alternative suggestions that is used by the tool. We have established relationships with the communities to co-create the vocabulary and to get their insights and feedback on our work. We have also worked on a methodology, how to efficiently work with the communities. We have developed a framework to analyze bias types and patterns in cultural heritage collections. And we did many capacity building events and developed capacity building materials as guidelines for the cultural heritage sector. So how do we address bias together with the communities? So here you can see the communities we are working with. And from the beginning, it was important for us that we establish these strong relationships and collaborate with minoritized communities to get that perspective, to learn what their needs are in terms of better understanding and get a better representation and more accurate representation of cultural heritage. We also wanted to make sure that our vocabulary would reflect and be mindful also of the self-descriptions of these communities and the terms that they would use for themselves. So this is what we've done over the last 8 months. We have organized 12 workshops with rather flexible approaches depending on the respective communities and groups. We have involved the communities to plan and facilitate these workshops. We have built most of the partners who have been working with these communities have built on existing relationships. Yes. We have, together with the communities, they analyzed selected items and listened to the perspectives to identify gaps and misrepresentations in the collections descriptions. We addressed biased language in catalog data and took into account the intersectional perspectives. So, as I said, the more theoretical framework, this all ended up in community engagement methodology, which can be accessed on Europeana Pro. So if you're interested about the work, please go to the website and you can download it from there. This is a glimpse of these workshops, and I guess that in the panel afterwards we'll get a bit more insight into this work. As I said, so each of these workshops has a slightly different setup. So either developing descriptions of collection items from the perspective of the communities, or we invited the communities to give us feedback on the terms and the vocabulary that we've created to see whether the contextualization and the suggestion is all right with them. So as I said, this is only a glimpse of the workshops we did in the project. This is the wheel of bias. This is part of what we developed in the theoretical framework. It has been used in these workshops to identify and to categorize the different types of biases that appear. And so you can attribute these different categories of bias to a term, and very often one term is connected with several of these categories of bias, for example, gender, race, and class. You know that that's the perspective on intersectionality, that the different levels of bias are interconnected. These are some of the outcomes of our work, which we are very proud of, and that have been created either by the communities or in cooperation with the communities. And we are very happy that Dani Matiri is here. He created this virtual exhibition that is accessible on Europeana called A Queer Tour. The Catholic University of Leuven, together with the community and the Kadok Archives, has curated a great exhibition that is called Face Surface. You can still visit it at the University of Leuven. We had community members analyzing bias and Europeana collection, as you can see here, decoding anti-Semitic cliches in cultural heritage collections. So these are the editorials we produced in the project. And maybe also a few words about the vocabulary, because that's, of course, also one of the main outputs of our project. So we have the vocabulary, of course, has not only been created in these workshops together with the communities. We have also searched into existing glossaries, but glossaries that have been established by communities, such as Homosaurus for the LGBTQA community. Words Matter is a very important resource that we've been building on in our project, which works mainly in the colonial context. We have used anti-Semitism, analysis of anti-Semitism in language. So most of the sources we've been using were sources that have been created by the communities themselves. So by now we have 650 terms in 5 languages. And what I will show you now is let's say, the human readable form of the vocabulary. That's how we work. That's how we build it. And the structure of this vocabulary is also has been transferred into a knowledge graph, so that it is also machine readable. This is a kind of huge work we are doing in the project. So identifying contentious terms is the one thing, but getting the right contentious issue description, also the suggestion for use. And then also disambiguation is a very huge endeavor we are doing in the project, but we would like to make sure that the vocabulary is very well curated, because the better we do it also and from the beginning, the easier is it for the tool to work accurately. Disambiguation is important because sometimes you have terms that are contentious in one context, but not contentious in another one, like exotic, where we have established or agreed upon that exotic can be used when it refers to plants or animals, but not to human beings. And there are many of these examples which need disambiguation. We also always mention the source, and as I said before, we also categorize these terms, whether this refers to sexuality or ethnicity or race. Yeah, how would that be shown or displayed on Europeana? So this is still in the mock-up version, but the idea is, and that's also how it will be implemented. So as you can see here with the term tribe, you see this small device icon on the right side. If you hover with your mouse on this term, then this window will pop up, and what you can read here is exactly the contentious issue description that we also have in the vocabulary that you've seen on the Excel sheet. If you would like to understand more about it, you can then click on read more, and then you have the full explanation. So the tool, as I said, I will not go into the details, but it's already available. We are still doing some improvements. And if you want to test it, so you can already test the standalone version, then please contact us. You will get our email later on in the slides, because I think it would be useful for you to get some instructions how to use the tool. And I think that's it from my side. And I will hand over to Jonas. Or Kerstin, would you? No, so Jonas.
It's fine with me if someone else wants to jump in with another comment. I'll leave that to you.
Yeah. Are there any comments, remarks, questions so far?
There is one in the chat, Kerstin.
Yeah.
It's a bit more complex. I don't know if we can answer this right
I'm just
directly
reading
now.
it.
Yes.
Okay, that's a very, I don't know. There are some terms in that question that I would need further explanation. I know from many non-German expatriates that they dislike the missing of a natural and healthy pride in Germany. Yeah, that can be a point of view, which I do not really understand, but maybe the person would like to speak up here.
No, he says you don't need to answer it. It's also
Okay, it's just a comment. Okay.
There was a question, but it's also a comment. Thank you for pointing this.
Yeah.
Well, the second question about the API. Yes, the tool has an API, and it's also there's documentation on GitHub. So it can also be integrated into, for example, other databases, or other databases can call the API as well. I will put something in the chat, and also the link to the tool.
Thank you, Christina.
And then I think we've got one raised hand with a question. Please feel free to.
Okay. Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for the presentation. This is Sipo from South Africa. So I had one question, right? Well, two questions. The first one is around, I'm glad that I see the work, right? And there's been teams that actually go out and look for contentious terms and have a column where they update that. I wanted to find out if I'm on the site and I see an image and that is titled in a way that I feel is contentious. would I have to go through the debias group or send an email? So that is question number one.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we are discussing whether there should be a kind of feedback button. But since there is a general feedback button, and Antoine, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a general feedback button for people to comment.
Yes.
So you can either go through this or you contact us via the debias email that's later on the slides.
Okay, and then the final question is, if I wanted to use this to do a similar model or use in some of the frameworks that you guys used, right, in my context now in South Africa, which channels would I need to follow?
I think the best way would to get in touch with us, and then we can have a discussion of what would be an appropriate way to do so. If I get your answer, your question right.
Oh, yes, you do. Thank you.
Yeah, but we will have also documentation of what we've been doing. I mean, as I said, the tool software will be on GitHub, and everything what we did in the project will be documented. We have guidelines and recommendations, but we are also happy, of course, if you get in touch with us for further details. Did that answer your question? Yeah, I think so. Antoine.
Yeah, actually, it's a bit odd, sorry, moderating, and because I would like to react to the previous comment. That's very interesting also for the project organization. The project also has to think of the next steps, and that the questions really made me realize that maybe in the plans for the future, and when the project officially closes, then we should organize maybe a way to channel that kind of feedback. And our team who handles user feedback, they have a tagging system that they use to triage the very varied kind of feedback that we have. Maybe it would be good to actually have something that allows explicitly to flag this sort of bias flagging, so that it gets handled in the best way possible.
That's a great idea, Antoine. Yeah.
Well, it's not really mine. It's the one of the gentlemen.
Yeah,
who,
but to take that up as a part of Europeana, of the Europeana team, that's also great. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions? No, then I would hand over to Jonas.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. As you can see, I'm Jonas van Mulder. Thank you for inviting me to moderate this session. It's a pleasure. I am an associate of CADOC, the Documentation and Research Center on Religion, Culture and Society of KU Leuven in Belgium, not the University of Leiden, unfortunately, but at KU Leuven, where my main responsibility is the curation of the international collections that we hold. And I do this in terms of research projects, exhibitions, and public programming. And in that capacity, I had the pleasure of contributing to the debias project together with my colleagues at the Department of Cultural Studies of KU Leuven, notably Fred Truyen was already mentioned, and Sophie Taas, who I think is here present with us today. And this we did by, amongst others, there were several various activities, of course, but amongst others by connecting colonial era photographic archives, so historical photography, with associated communities in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Belgium. And we saw an example of one of those activities earlier in the slides, including pictures from a workshop that was organized and indeed an exhibition that we opened 2 weeks ago. So today I have the privilege to introduce you to, I think, a great panel consisting of 4 very interesting speakers. Their names have been mentioned, and you can see them here on the slide as well. So we have among us Asli Özgen Havakotte, who is Assistant Professor Media and Culture at the University of Amsterdam. Dani Martiri of Queering Rome, a project that wants to create a queer approach to Rome's cultural heritage. Next, we have Kaat Somers, curator, researcher at Fotomuseum or FOMU in Antwerp. And finally, Rositsa Atanasova, who works at the British Library as a digital curator. And I deliberately limited my introductions to the minimum because the panelists were asked on beforehand to introduce themselves, to introduce their work, their background in, say, 5-minute introductions. And then from there, we will proceed to further talk about various aspects of debiasing collections and the role of community work therein. But to start, I would like to give the floor to Asli.
Thank you, Jonas. Thank you for invitation as well. It's great to be here to talk about debias and how it relates to my work. I come from a more academic setting, and I have been working with mostly collections of migrant communities and migration and diasporic communities in the Netherlands. I am from a migrant background. I moved to the Netherlands for my PhD from Turkey, and I'm mostly interested in the archival presence and absence of the Turkish community mostly, but also other migrant communities. I'm working at the University of Amsterdam, and maybe some of you know our MA program, Preservation and Presentation of the Moving Image. And yeah, I think I'll stop there. I don't really like talking about myself. I prefer to talk about the research a bit later, so I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Asli. We will go indeed in further detail later. So unfortunately, I will have to ask you to talk a bit more in length about yourself and your work later, but we can return to that. Just in the order of people appearing on my screen, I now give the word to Dani.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, I'm Dani Martiri. I use they, them pronouns. I am currently an independent curator and a member of the ICOM Italy working group dedicated to LGBTQ+ rights and gender issues. And I have, yeah, as was said before, planned and delivered workshops and community engagement moments, occasions for the Debias project. I mostly work with queer communities, and I'm a part of the trans and non-binary community specifically myself. Yes, I also started this independent project, which started out as dissemination outside of academia of queer scenes within heritage in general, and yeah, that's about it for me as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Dani. Same for you. We'll return to some aspects of your work later. Kaat, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. My name is Kaat Somers. My pronouns are she, her. I am a researcher and I work within the collection team of FOMU, the Fotomuseum in Antwerp. There I work mainly around registration of photographs and how we can deal with, more precisely, colonial photographs that we have in our collection. Because of this, I quickly fell into the area where Kalok and Sophia and Jonas are also researching, so I met them soon enough. I followed a couple of programs such as the Reinhardt Academy's digitally decolonizing course, also the sharing stories on contested histories by Reinhardt Academy and RCE. I've attended several DBias events, sector events, but also colleague groups within Belgium, because it's a heavily supported theme within many collections. And yeah, what I would like to focus on later on is this research project that I've applied a funding for in the Flemish government, and it talks about, or it focuses on the participation of communities within collection registration. And our focus, as we're a photo museum, and we're partnering up with a couple of other collections for this. Our focus would be on both the textual language that is used within the collection registration, but also, and mainly perhaps because we're a photo museum, how the visual language is or could be made less violent, or how it is established as it is right now, and how we deal with this, how we mediate or not. So those are the main focal points that I'm addressing here already, and then I'll give the word to the next person.
Thanks so much, Kat. We'll definitely talk about that later on. But first, I'd like to give the floor to Rosita to present herself.
Hi, just to check you can hear me. Yes.
Yes.
Really lovely to be part of this panel this morning. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Rosita. I work at the British Library, which is the National Library of the United Kingdom. And our holdings are huge, so that's one of our challenges when working with problematic vocabularies and inclusive terminology. Holdings of estimated 170 million items spanning over 3,000 years. And I was just looking up yesterday, one of our oldest items is an oracle bone from about 16,000 BC, so up to modern archives and harvested web UK domain. So really vast collections. As in my role as digital curator, I work with digitized collections, and particularly working on improving accessibility in terms of metadata enrichment and enabling computational use of the collections as data. So I've been involved with some capacity building activities around using methods from corpus linguistics, combined with archival research to highlight curatorial voices in legacy catalog descriptions, and to examine those critically and contextualize them. But today I'm speaking for the library, and in particularly on behalf of one of the projects as part of a 3-year kind of action plans called Race Equality Action Plan, and in the middle of that, and in particular the key strand of that around addressing bias and harmful collection descriptions, cataloging processes and systems. The project is led by my colleague Pardat Shamsaz, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. And so I will say a little bit more about that later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosita. Building on those introductions, I would like to start with asking a very general question, but hopefully it gives you the opportunity to elaborate a bit what you already said. Of course, it was mentioned earlier by Kerstin, DBias had this very specific objective, steering towards a technological AI-based innovation regarding the issue at stake, vocabulary terminology. But that process over the course of the project was, of course, fueled by community activities that were arranged by several of the involved project partners. So I think it's safe to say that expertise and capacity building also took place on that domain. So my first question to all of you would be, how do you perceive the role, the importance, the vital role of community work in relation to inclusive cataloging and respectful descriptions? And I'll try to translate that very broad question to all of you individually. And I would like to start with you, Rosita. As you mentioned, the sheer vastness of the collections that you work with in general, but also I assume in the library itself. Perhaps in relationship to the project that you mentioned, how do you prioritize specific forms of bias or communities that are represented in the collection and that might have an interest in seeking collaboration with you or seeking a more intensive relationship with the heritage? How do you go about establishing those connections with the community, and how do you start collaborating with them? How do you go about that first vital part of the project or of a collaboration that can be a stepping stone towards a really intensive collaboration, or can perhaps not go in that direction? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. So one of the points I wanted to make, kind of on behalf of my colleagues again, is that we've always been doing this kind of work of trying to describe collections fully and respectfully engage our communities. We haven't managed probably to engage as much the communities when it comes to kind of actively and authentically having their input in our descriptions. However, we have run projects like public engagement projects, for example, around describing our collections of playbills, so through crowdsourcing, for example. Or we had a project around called The Age of Enslavement, and other projects through ECHO, where we have tried to engage the community in that way through making our digitized collections available on platforms such as Zooniverse, or previously on a platform we had developed ourselves called LibCrowds, and kind of asking for their input, but also giving them the opportunity to examine the documents. This was all supported through kind of online fora, curators being there to answer questions, to support people with any sensitive material that was made available. So community engagement has been really, really important and big part of this work, and we want to obviously scale that up. Internally, we've tried to create an inclusive description community of practice. So that's now well established. It's a forum for curators, catalogers, anyone in the library. I'm a member of it. A couple of my colleagues are here today, Adi and Harry. And so we meet regularly to share best practice, to discuss key topics, and to attempt this kind of prioritization. Obviously, we have to start somewhere. So we have been serving collections to come up with these priorities, but this is an iterative, ongoing work. So we're thinking both about the strategies around how to audit collections, how to then contextualize what kind of processes need to support that. We're thinking about the internal community engagement through this fora, meeting regularly, sort of having both a practical element to test certain tools and methods, but also kind of discursive element. So some of the topics that have been discussed around offensive titles, prejudicial works, and so on. We have also a digital scholarship reading group internally. And again, we kind of discuss texts or reports or projects of others. So we're learning a lot about this work from others, including the DBias project. And so externally, we are part of many UK-wide and national, international libraries and archival working groups, collaborating on what is the best way to deal with sort of the inclusive description. So it's very particularly that kind of got a momentum around the inclusive terminology glossary work that Carissa Chu did with the National Library of Scotland. And we are kind of looking at some funding opportunities to collaborate. And the project that I mentioned, led by Padat Shamsas, is focusing initially on racialized content, material related to colonial activity and enslavement. But of course, we continue to kind of review the areas, collection areas that we want to prioritize. It's, as I mentioned, it's an ongoing iterative work, and there are many different approaches, and we are very interested in what we can do with the DBias audit tool, but also the framework. And I look forward to hearing from others as well. about their work. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosica. You mentioned mostly work that has been going on internally. So among colleagues sharing expertise, is there also a public platform where we as researchers or where the broader audience can observe your actions in this field? So maybe there's a link that can be posted in the chat maybe, or can be shared afterwards.
It's just to, sorry to interrupt you, just to kind of reiterate that we're kind of halfway through this 3-year project, and so a lot more will be shared externally with the community. We are currently we've got this kind of internal report that we've produced, initial report on inclusive description and discovery to support staff, and also beginning to think, and we're really interested in the kind of storytelling methodology and the methodology that the Bias project has developed for us to start working more actively with the communities externally. And there will be more information being shared, will be shared later on, and I could share with everyone Padat's email address, who will be able to respond to any particular questions.
Thank you so much. That would be interesting. Moving up again, I'm not just following like the panel members as they appear here on the screen. There is a plan, bear with me, but I'd like to ask a question to Kat now, who already mentioned this project that has been submitted. And you already very briefly, I know it already a bit, because you mentioned it before, the overall structure, but then here in this respect, could you elaborate a bit more on how specifically you situate community work vis-a-vis creating more correct and respectful descriptions in the project? And I also assume the project is meant as a stepping stone towards a more structural practice within FOMU in the future. So if you could elaborate on that for a couple of minutes, thank you.
So the project that I've submitted is really the first time that we would include community work inside the collection. Of course, we've done a bit of public engagement, but the education, we've done community work already in a different manner. But there it's more about inviting and making the spaces safe within the museum. Now it's the digital space that we're trying to make safer, the catalog, the online catalog. And I should mention, we were six partners altogether within the project, but FOMU is the one leading or taking the initiative. And we're heavily looking towards how the Bias and KADOK KU Leuven build their expertise with the communities in Belgium, because of course we're in the same historical context, in the same sphere. And we're looking at the same partners, really, I guess, for a certain extent. But the big underlying question remains: how do we invite communities, not even to the museum, because I think that's a very big threshold. How do we go to the communities, perhaps? I have to say, this is all really first baby steps we're taking here. So it's very exciting, but we're relying on the Congolese Congolese circle in Belgium. Very familiar to Jonas and Sophie. And they are our entry point into the communities. We're really working together with them as a partner in the project, hoping to build a dialogue there, and how to keep it sustainable afterwards. That's another very big question, how to keep this relationship going and flowing. I don't have clear answers for this already. Of course, we haven't started yet. The outline of the project would be from April 2025 until April 2026. So it's just 1 year to establish, to start to start this relationship with the communities and see how they interact with the material that we provide. Not sure if I'm already answering all the things you've asked, but yeah, this is the main goal of the research: how to establish a methodology, participative methodology within several collections, and how to keep it sustainable, how to make it safe as well. And I'm sure it will be hopefully not violent at times, but how to really step up and make sure communities aren't that we're not just asking solutions from them, but making sure that we're the ones providing all the work. Let's say that we're doing the work and they're helping in the way that they can, making sure that they're also compensated for their work and all the questions that we have for them. So it's a difficult balance. Yeah, not sure what else I can say about it, but I'm sure there will be questions later on. So.
Exactly. Just one more question to link already a bit to perhaps the answers or the questions to Dani and Asli. As you are a museum, as you work in a museum, do you think this creates a different dynamic, or in other words, does this project is this project fueled also by feedback that you may or may not have received by visitors visiting the museum, reading descriptions, or is this mostly based on your experience as a curator, as a researcher, as a member of international networks thinking about this issue? Do you receive comments from visitors as well?
Yeah, I have to say, in 2022, we had this very large exhibition on recaptioning Congo with Sandrine Collard. And here a lot of violent photographs were shown as well. And so in an exhibition, it's different than online. In the exhibition, we could present it in a manner that the people visiting really had a physical threshold to watch or to not see violent images. And the context was given either by a guide, but also with the texts that are provided. While in an online environment, it's very difficult to guide people towards the safe areas or to safe spaces there. But it was a very difficult exhibition even then. So even if the physical thresholds or the barriers are there, it's still very, very hard to make sure it's non-violent experience for everyone. So yes, it's because we're a museum, there's both the very physical, the visitors are demographics that are perhaps not as diverse as we would like versus the online catalog. And right now we have to say, there's a lot of collections that we are not even publishing because we're not sure what to do with them, and they're still just under embargo, let's say, because it's not safe. And I have to say also that because we're a museum, there's a lot of faces or facades, let's say. There's the internal policies, internal workings, the internal work culture, and then there's what we aim at externally. So there's how these are working together and how they intertwine. It's interesting to see as well. So the museum organogram is changing, or the personnel is changing as well, or that's it's an aim since a couple of years. But it's still a very wide institution. So how do you deal also in internal working cultures with this issue? So that's a couple of points there.
Thank you, Kat. No, I think you touch upon a very crucial aspect here, and I think that is also fundamental to de-bias. How can an online space be a safe space by implementing specific aspects? I think that the de-bias project was to a large extent about it, or is about it. Dani, I'm heading back in your direction. So in the panel, we have both colleagues that work for institutions that administer collections, like Rosita and Kat. For Asli and Dani, I think it's a bit different, working with institutions. So coming in collaborations with I assume. Whether that's true or not is now the question, with different expectations, different questions, creating a different engagement. So Danny, I would like to ask you the question, how, as you entered into collaborations with partners within the DBIAS project, were you coming with ideas, with questions that were really, I assume they were rooted in questions that live today within the community, being in Rome, like a city with an endless, so to say, an iconic city when we speak about cultural heritage and history. So I wonder, the question whether community activities are important or not is, I think, superfluous when I speak with you. But what was at stake when you first got in contact with the project? What were your questions? How do you think these questions were answered in the course of the project?
Some questions were answered. But, even during this one panel, more and more are coming up, how do you make an online space safe, which again, as you said, was the whole point of DBIAS. I think we are still at a point where, I mean, we don't really, just as people, as human beings, still don't know exactly how to navigate what we created with digital spaces. It's great that they exist for an infinite number of reasons, but again, like it's such and it's an overarching question in the sense that it doesn't just pertain to cultural heritage, of course, or collections. It's to do with digital citizenship. It's to do with how does an institution then project itself onto the digital? How do people think of an institution that has digitalized itself or a part of itself? So it's not just something that institutions can't. I'm not even sure that it's up to institutions to educate people on how to navigate the digital and how to use it. It's probably, I mean, not the institutions, not at least non institutions like museums. If I'm thinking of museums specifically, there could be other places that educate people to navigate these issues. But again, going back to the question of heritage more specifically, maybe I did have questions. I did come to DBIAS with questions because already the idea, for example, that DBIAS landed on of deploying maybe for example, content warnings as a way of signaling and signposting harmful language. It's not something. It's something that had been in the air for a quite long time outside of the heritage community as well. So and there was no answer, no correct answer for it. Had kind of been adopted acritically in other environments, in other contexts. And I mean, to this day, I still don't have that question answered of whether it's the perfect means, it's the perfect tool, but it is a tool to start with. I don't remember whether it was, sorry, Rosita, or if it was Kat saying you have to start from somewhere. And you got to start from somewhere, and at the point where you started, it's not even so much about. I think one of the questions that came up a lot for me was not so much what do you prioritize, because I understand that that's very much an organizational concern. in a big infrastructure, you do have to prioritize things. I understand that they have to strategize, but the point when you come to from a non-institutional perspective is that prioritizing feels a bit restrictive. It feels like it's about channeling channeling in channels. Sorry about the play with words, but it's about channeling with yourself or your knowledge or your capacities within channels that are too tight. It feels like you're downscaling the potential of what this work is all about. Uh, Again, maybe I don't know that there's sort of a middle ground for this, but to mediate between the two necessities, the institutional ones and those of people coming from outside of them. But yeah, generally speaking, I think that the questions answered, for every question that was answered, there were more, especially with the community engagement moments that we did. We came to the communities with, I mean, with a set of questions, and then the discussion just ended up bringing about more questions and more worries, I think. So it's never ending, and I think the main takeaway is that institutions are never institutions, but also communities, honestly, are never done with the work. It's about thinking of DBias in this case, but really any project as an ongoing, as it started, but as soon as we've got some answers, maybe even guidelines, written down, we need to keep implementing them, and that brings about more questions. So yeah.
That's true. But as I mentioned, creating a safe space is also meant to just be able to vocalize specific questions that would otherwise not come on the table, so to speak. Fanny, can you briefly, maybe I should have asked this as a first question, just in a couple of words, I know that's impossible, just introduce a queering room to the audience, because I guess many people don't exactly know what that's about, and maybe when just introducing it in a few lines can link what you do in that project and the bias.
I mean, Queering Rome is just really a project that I decided to personally undertake as an independent curator, but also as an art historian, who'd been trained into highlighting queer themes within collections. That's an experience that I got from working at the from volunteering at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and that I decided to apply to a context I was more familiar with, which is that of Rome. And it started out as a dissemination project, really, just talking about aspects that are present in academic studies but are not so openly discussed outside of academia, whether that be in school level education or museum communication and interpretation. And then I think it was kind of more like a window onto a question that I think the Italian context had very slowly been opening up to for a long time, but always through these very independent and not so well connected or very well networked projects, and that were happening here and there across the country. Yeah, it was just a way sort of a way to shout out to people, hey, do any other projects like this exist? Yeah.
So much, Danny. I think it's a wonderful project. I hope many more years are to come. Asli, I'm sorry to end the circle of questions with you, but you have to start and end somewhere. I allow myself to link your work with your background, as you introduce yourself as coming from a migrant background, working with heritage, with film more specifically. So my question to you would be, how does your background plays a role in I'm not going to use the word prioritize again, but to make valuable connections with heritage and with heritage institutions, and doing that with communities in the Netherlands, whether it be Turkish communities or other communities with a migrant background. How do you let fuel your work by connecting with migrant experiences in the Netherlands, specifically working together with cultural heritage institutions or voila.
Thank you, Jonas. I think already a lot of interesting things have been said, so I'm going to try to sort of tie everything in a little bit. From specifically my research, when I started looking into what is there in the archives from the Turkish community, I'm working with mostly audiovisual collections because I come from a film history background. So it's a different case than a museum setting, than a library setting. So that was the first challenge, I think, because audiovisual object, I mean, there's a lot of already theory and thought being produced about decolonizing the collections, decolonizing the museum, but audiovisual object has its own specific affordances, therefore specific problems when it comes to, you know, like asking specific questions. What does it mean, you know, to work on inclusivity, but also I think it is, it posits also specific questions preservation and presentation level. So we talked about digital space being safe, but when it comes to the audiovisual object, then it is hard to always imagine a digital space, because most of the time the encounter happens in a either through a screen that is more, you know, like either a television screen or a film screen. So I have been therefore interested in more specifically, first of all, trying to find out like how does encounter with the audiovisual object happen from the community's perspective. One of the first challenges I encountered when I was trying to map out what is there in the archives from the Turkish community, there is actually a lot, but most of them remain invisible or inaccessible because of there is not enough metadata or correct metadata. So how I came across the bias is actually not only the biasing problematic terms, there's quite a lot, and usually those terms are shared across migrant communities like allochtone, buitenlanders, like, you know, all these like terms that are abandoned. So not only that, but also coming from more like decolonial frameworks, all those silences and absences are also a form of bias. So if we are working on the biasing, it's not only changing problematic terms with, you know, like the terms that we use today that are empowering for those communities, but also filling in those blanks from the perspective of the community. The second challenge I came across was when we talk of communities, communities are not uniform. My contact with the Turkish community has always been from the perspective of, you know, I go to 1st of May marches. I just am more politically active with the left-wing circles. So it's a limited actually exposure and limited contact, because there's also a lot of, you know, like Turkish community members that don't come into contact with those left-wing political circles. And there's a lot of different opinions, different readings of the same historical events. So then for me, the bias is also was a starting point in the sense that thinking about how to include maybe multiple perspectives on, like one single audiovisual object, not only, of course, enriching the metadata and correcting, correcting the metadata, filling in the blanks from the community perspective to empower the community's own narratives, but also really thinking further as a maybe digital interface as well, how to involve or include multiple perspectives on a single object. So now I'm working closely with Christian Olesen as well, who is more like a digital heritage scholar. And we're really actually trying to imagine how that would look like. I think there's a lot of potential that could involve multiple perspectives. And that's for me very much related to the idea of reparations and repair. It is an epistemic problem. It is not only a representation problem, but it's a problem that is very much related to the present and the future as well, in that sense, to empower the communities. I remember one the bias event, for example, that I joined a workshop where we worked with a newsreel from 1970s, Polygon Journal, about the Surinamese migrants coming to the Netherlands, and then we looked at first of all the description in the archive database. But later on, we were asked to write our own, description of how we would describe it. We, composed of different people from different backgrounds. But then at the end of the workshop, the moderators also showed us what the community wrote in another, iteration of the workshop with the community. And there were like a lot of little details that only Surinamese community could see in that little newsreel, but also the background. Like they had a little bit more information about why there were so many migrants coming up at that point and what the problem was in Suriname. So indeed, there's like a multi-dimensional and multi-layered knowledge that exists only within the community. So I think it's impossible to do it without the community's engagement. But again, how the main challenge for me is how not to homogenize the community and how to find ways to, to find ways to include that also multivocality in the communities. I think, did I answer your question?
And even more. Maybe one last question to you as well, Leslie, and this applies to, I think, the other speakers as well. The heritage that we talk about is mostly representing these communities, not coming from these communities. Specifically when we talk about film, like working in a collection myself with a vast volume of audiovisual heritage coming from missionary colonial context, working together with community members, how complex these communities and groups are internally. But one question or one issue that is common to all of them is, how do you, as an institution, communicate about this heritage that is not their own heritage, is representing them, is important because it contains factual information, images, details, data that they have never seen before, but nevertheless, it is always representing them in a specific way. So how do you go about introducing the people that you work with to this material as a form of a, so to speak, disclaimer or as an introductory talk that you have with them? How do you go about this? How do you go about explaining this nuance?
Is that a question to me specifically?
I would like to start with you, and then perhaps, given the fact that we have 7 minutes left, and there's maybe people in the audience that have questions as well. Time is too short, but I'd like to end this with you asking this question, and maybe the others can jump in.
Okay. I think that's a I think very big challenge, and I think from the examples or communities that I'm working with, I think I can think of there isn't a single answer to this question, depending again of how the communities, what the communities want to do with this material. Some communities want them destroyed. Some don't want them to circulate, but actually, you know, kept only for historical purposes. Again, don't destroy them because that means a certain erasure as well of the colonial violence. And others, like I think I, in that sense, from a researcher perspective, sympathize a bit more with Anne Stoller's idea of shifting, you know, the focus to also the archiving, you know, what is collected, what is recorded, and how this is itself a certain register of a certain type of violence. And that can be studied then, you know, like how not to reproduce it in the current image economies. But again, I think Danny mentioned like where does the responsibility of the institutions begin and end? I think communities probably. I'm really more I incline towards giving communities the word about how they see what they want to do this with these images, because it's images of them. But that said, there's also images from the communities, and that are mostly marginalized as well in the collections. And I think it's also important to maybe more empower those, you know, types of material, maybe at the cost of circulating those images from the colonial images. You see what I mean? Like it could be a matter of more curating and presenting and making more accessible, therefore more visible. And that could be one way of really empowering images from the communities themselves. I know it's very broad, but there are different cases. I think different communities have different approaches, so it's impossible to, I think, give a clear one solution.
Thank you so much. No, I think you rephrased my question more eloquently than I did. So I think looking at the time, maybe there is other panelists that want to react to this final question that we've discussed. So I give the floor to anyone who wants to jump in.
I just wanted to say very quickly that yes, it is. I also agree that it should be left down. It should be left to the communities what to do with certain images. I can only speak from the queer community point of view, and the fact that we are in a position these days to call it the queer community, to refer to it at large, is, I think, an interesting point to make every time we discuss what we do with images, what we do with heritage. Who does it belong to? So the word queer never really belonged to the queer community, at least in the Anglophone world, and then all of a sudden it did, because the community reappropriated it. So I think that's one interesting example of what reclaiming something, even if it wasn't yours in the beginning, how it can function. It's not to say that it's the only approach possible, but that it is possible even when it does not seem like some piece of heritage might be appropriate to define or to represent a community, and then shows you how important the community's voice can be to define that in the to define that at last.
Exactly, Danny. Thank you very much. No, you really corrected me in the sense that while heritage may not be coming from a specific community, there is always the possibility to take ownership of a specific collection or individual objects. dynamic on its own can be very valuable and necessary in some cases. So thank you for that final comment. I don't know, Kaats or Rositza, what did you want to add something
I think all
before we close off? I think you.
Yes, I'm sorry,
yeah,
I've
exactly.
muted myself again. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with what was said earlier. There's so much more we need to do in order to describe all of our collections, to describe them in a way that they're more accessible. And we need more resources and new methodologies and a mix of methodologies, because there should be some flexibility in this kind of practice and understanding people and contexts and communities and their associated terminology and descriptions, because they will always evolve. And we need to definitely collaborate with the community. We want projects in every department. We don't want to prioritize. We want to kind of start somewhere, but we want to make sure everyone is doing this kind of work across the library. And for us, it's a step change. It really is about cultural change, sort of sustainable change in the organization, and learning from others. I could share the digital research email address in the chat if anyone is more interested to talk to us about how we're doing things and how we can collaborate. We'll be very interested in hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Rositza. And you already added another link to the chat.
Also, just to say that we've been really pleased on how the Device project has responded to requests from the British Library to kind of come and run sessions specifically for us. So we had a talk earlier in October about what the project is delivering, particularly interested in the kind of the auditing tool, as well as the frameworks and methodologies to help us sort of test that with our collections. And we have a follow-on workshop scheduled for January to think about how we can take the tool ourselves, use the APIs, and how we can take back kind of some of the annotations that the project creates. So we're really grateful for that, sort of building capacity internally with the project.
Thank you, Rositza. Yeah, I've heard the bias being mentioned as an inspiration to all of you. So that was a separate question, but it was interlaced in everything that you said. So that made my job much easier. Given the fact that there is a lot of sessions still planned today, we're on time. So I propose we stay on time. And I want to invite everybody in thanking this wonderful panel for sharing their thoughts. It was a pleasure for me. And I hope to see or hear or write to you later. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonas.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we can start the second part of the DBIAS workshop with an interactive session. Corinne and Kerstin, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Antoine. I'm just gonna request the slides for just a bit to introduce you to our interactive session. We've heard quite a lot earlier about the Device project, but also about all the activities that our panelists are doing in their own context and how they see this very complex topic of debiasing cultural heritage collections. And in the second part of the session, we would want to hear from you. And we're going to do this as we are in this virtual environment via an online tool. So I would like to ask everyone to go to quanda.eu, and we also put the link into the chat. And when you see the when you are on the website, you will see at the very top a button that says join session. And there you will be asked to enter a code. And I don't think the slide deck was updated or reloaded after we included that. So I'm going to just mention the code for you. It's 1507. And I will stop sharing my screen because we're now going to move over to my colleague Sophie, who will monitor the Quanda sessions, and so that they can hopefully also show for everyone on the screen.
Does it work, Kirsten?
I can see your screen, yes.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I think we've already got 30 people joining, if I'm understanding the numbers correctly, yes.
Excuse me? Sorry,
Yes.
this is Tom. I can only see a thing that tells me what color.
Yeah, you see you see colors and you see a question is coming your way soon. No? Is that correct?
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That is perfect, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm trying to go full screen here. It's not working. I don't know exactly why. Yeah, okay. We'll give it a couple of seconds, Kirsten.
Yes.
For
everyone.
Let's say 30 people or more can come in. And by the way, people who, I don't know, drop out or have to jump out for a minute and come back can still join the same session as long as you use that same code, 1507. And as soon as we're at 30, I will launch the first question and hand back moderation to you, Corinne and Kirsten.
Still 2 people.
Yeah, it's always good to add some excitement and some.
Okay, and just Sophie, I see there is a pop-up about the language. Confirm your language. It's okay. It's okay.
I think we now lost again a person. Okay, now it's jumping ahead. Very good. Okay, maybe let's kick it off. What do you think, Kirsten?
Yes.
Let's get started.
Let's get started. Here we go.
Okay. So this is our first question, just a very general one. Just trying to get an understanding of your own experiences, whether you ever have encountered any prejudices, stereotypes, inappropriate expressions, or images in cultural collections, and you should have 4 answer options available to you. And I think we can see things popping up, and it seems pretty obvious that at least for the people here, this is a topic that is very much in your awareness. No one has selected the no answer yet. And I think we've got a pretty even spread between the other answer options at the moment. So I think we'll just give it another minute or 2 to see if that changes. Now we've got equal spreadings. That's a nice picture.
But what is interesting is that there is no still, and it's very interesting to see this, and it means also that we as a community, I mean, we are there is an awareness about it. I mean, and it's very interesting to see this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it also speaks to the experiences that we had throughout the project in the different kind of events and workshops and kind of getting togethers that we've run, where there always was kind of this this awareness and interest in the topic there already, even though we are all at very different stages on the devising journey, so to say. But I think let's leave this question with this very nice and equal spread and move on to the second question, please. And this is just so there's of course no kind of official answer to this, but just kind of from your own kind of experience and what you think, what would you say the percentage of publicly accessible heritage collections is that has a problem in terms of bias? Yeah, I think we're just gonna give this also a little bit more time as we see numbers popping up. I think if
it's yes, it's interesting to see that it's from 10. I think 10% till where is the maximum 91. So there is a big gap.
Excuse me, where do we enter?
You mean where do you enter the number?
A number, yeah.
Yeah, on the Quanda website, you should have a slider so you can move your dot, so to say, along the slider line from 1 to 100, and that.
Yes, I see it now. Thank you.
Number.
Yeah, so what is it? The average number is really interesting because it's really close to middle, yes, 50, 60. But yes, the gap is very interesting as well because it's from 10 to 91. So, I mean, it will be very interesting to go more in details about this, those numbers.
Yeah, I think if we had kind of a smaller group in the audience, we probably would have done similar kind of exercises in breakout groups, and that would then also have allowed us to tell a little bit or to get a little bit more behind those numbers and your experiences that they reflect. Because I think I agree with Corinne that it's interesting to have this relatively broad spread, even though on average we are kind of leveling in around
but
maybe 2/3, so to say.
And again, it's referring to what has been said during all the presentation of the bias and all the experience, in particular of the partners who were in contact with communities. What is also interesting is maybe also this number is related to the definition of what is bias, what can be offensive terms. So it's very interesting, to go in details, to use the wheel of bias presented by Kerstin, because this when you work with the communities, then and it's our experience, then the vision, the definition, understanding of bias and offensive terms change a lot, because then it's really a moving and evolutive understanding as well. So it will be very interesting to go deep on those numbers and on the definition of the bias, offensive terms, etc.
Yeah, I'm just seeing also the comment from Adi in the chat. Yeah, that's very true. We don't really have a complete understanding of this, and I think what Corinne just said also is something that might be coming up in the next question, because one of the things that we've also realized is that there's a broad spread in terms of how direct and blatant and in the face sometimes the bias can be, and on the other side kind of very subtle level, so to say, of and Sophia, if you could move us to the next slide, please. This is the question that looks into this, and I think we would be interested in understanding of how confident you feel to identify subtleties of bias specifically in metadata, so in the descriptions of heritage collections. I think we'll just give it a little bit of time while you move your dots around.
Of course, I guess that the answer differs a lot from those of us who are already engaged in working on this topic, and the other ones, of course. Yeah, so it clears that it's very different.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also something, just to pick up on what Corinne just said, with regard to the wheel of bias, which we have used in different contexts throughout the project. And I think one experience that we had is that this wheel of bias also is something that helps you to kind of get closer to the subtle bias version, so to say. So at the beginning, when you kind of look at a cultural heritage object or its description, it's very easy to kind of identify the direct biases, that are kind of into your face. And then if you do another round and maybe another round and have conversations with the people who are with you at the table, specifically if you can be in the lucky situation to have input from the communities that are affected by the specific collection, you get closer to those subtleties of bias, I think.
Yeah. Yes, and some key learnings from the project is that, of course, there are lists of obvious biases, let's say, or you shared by communities, shared by the professionals, but it's really a work to be done with different communities and with professionals and diversity of professionals, so linguists, historian, anthropologists, etc., to understand, in fact, some biases, and because it's also very in relation with the languages, so it means with and with the history or culture, at national level or at European levels. And what we discovered also all along the project is that sometimes one term can be offensive in one country or in one context and not in another one. So this is why it's very important to work on this also at national and European level and with local communities. And that has been a very huge work by the partners of the bias.
If I can add a quick comment.
Yeah.
Normally, when I conduct these Quander interactive sessions, I am used to asking people with extreme opinions, so a high number or a dot further away on the arrow, to maybe comment on why they picked that specific position.
Yeah, sure.
But in this case, I would be really, really interested to hear from the people who park themselves right in the middle. Because if you feel in between highly confident and not at all confident, I would be curious how you would qualify this middle position. Could be a person who has maybe worked on a very, very, very specific collection or a case of bias or a smaller project and is not that confident in different contexts, but also not experienced, not unexperienced altogether. So I found this interesting that some people really intentionally picked the midpoint on this dilemma line.
But can we technically give open the mic, give the possibility to the participants to speak here?
Yeah, I think if anyone wants to comment on their dot where they place themselves, you can either do that via the chat, or if you want to just open your mic and comment directly.
No, I don't see if someone want to.
I think there's one comment in the chat from
I'm
us.
far above highly confident there.
Sorry, I just spoke over you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
All right, I'm saying my dot, even though on the Q&R site, it looks like I'm squarely on the arrow on the right-hand side. It actually shows me on the screen in the, what do you call it, where the results are, as being way off the end.
Okay.
So, but it is true. I am extremely highly confident that we can do this.
That's good. That's good to know, and a positive feedback. Thank you.
I have a background in AI and so on, so it's I really am sure we can do this.
Yeah, and just wanted to know about people who are highly confident. Is it because you already worked on this with your collections, or?
I'm working on
Okay, okay,
in a prototype. So
okay. And for the people who are not at all confident, okay, who want to?
by the way,
okay.
can I just add one little thing there?
Yes.
There are people who will introduce, there are bad actors who will introduce biases, and they're getting better and better at being subtle about it. So it's an ongoing situation. It's not something that we will have a final solution and that'll be that. Okay. It will be like in the same way as we deal with various fraud things on the internet. So it's something that we'll have to keep going at and keep modifying, just like with viruses. Okay.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
not something that will have a definitive end to it. It's
Yeah.
something we'll just have to deal with all the time. So but I think we can get better and better at identifying it and identifying it automatically. That's really it.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think that's a valid point that you made at the very end, that this is something that is a continuous process and not one that has a definite end. And I think that's also something that in general we see in basically anything digital, because there are also kind of, I mean, technology is advancing day by day, and new things are coming in, as you said, in terms of also the intended and malicious introduction of new biases. So yeah.
Now,
yeah, I see
don't get me wrong,
comment. Sorry.
cultural heritage in itself is something that never stops. It is constantly being created as we speak, so we live in a very dynamic system. Okay.
Yep.
And we're dealing with very dynamic content bases. So, it always will be a situation where we're constantly working to address something new. Okay. In whatever way we're talking about, whether it's technical or whether it's, in terms of bias, whether it's in terms of actual content and how we treat it and how we look at it, because our viewpoints and our social viewpoints are changing all the time as well. So anyway, sorry, I'll shut up now.
No, sure, but you're fully right. I mean, it's also very in relation with the evolution of the society and the way the society evolved in terms of inclusion, of paying attention to the others, etc. And it's also, as we can see from Kira comments on the chat, it's really also a question of a political decision from an institutions, and also how is it supported by the national level or the European level. I mean, it's not only technical, but it's really in relation with vision and values. I think of the role of culture. So and it can be sometimes very sensitive. This is why working with communities sometimes means working with different groups of the same communities. So this is very delicate, as we say in France. In French. Maybe we can move to the next question.
Yeah, let's move to the next question. And this is a question about where in the collection specifically you think most problems are situated. And you have the possibility again to kind of move your dot along kind of the X or the Y axis. So looking at, is it in the metadata, in the descriptions? Is it in the imagery? So kind of in the object itself, specifically if we're talking about digitized material that we visit online. Is it about really appropriate terms being part of the descriptions, or is it more about kind of things that are left out or where we lack context in order to describe it appropriately? And I think as more dots are appearing, one thing that we can say it's that there are currently more dots on the metadata side than on the image side. And I think that's also kind of reflecting the focus that the buyers, at least at the moment, took. So we are concentrating on the descriptions, on the metadata in our analysis. But I think on the other hand, we also have to say that in evaluating the tools, so one of the activities that we've are currently still doing and processing, we also saw that there are quite a lot of kind of interlinkages between the descriptions and the objects and the images. And sometimes the bias might only become obvious when you put both of them together. And then I think on the y-axis, it seems a relatively even spread between inappropriate terms and lack of context. And I think that also is something that we found in our engagement with the communities. So I think we had essentially both situations represented, where just the language was not correct or not correct anymore in terms of how the descriptions were phrased, but also just kind of a lot of lack of context. I think it was Asli earlier who mentioned her experience in one of the workshops where essentially it was only kind of information and knowledge that the community members had, which kind of helped them to get to a more appropriate description of things.
Yes, because the approach of the project was not to remove the terms, but to put it into context, because in historical point of view, it's important to have this, this knowledge, this traceability of the terms and evolution of the terms.
May I jump in?
Sure.
That said, I completely agree. That said, we also sometimes see lack of context being used as a legitimation to continue using problematic terms. So that's why I was a bit careful to put it a bit high or a bit low. I think it's important to see also that dynamic at play as well. Context is always very important, but it shouldn't come, I think, at the cost of correcting or debiasing the terms used in the problematic terms. I hope,
You mean that this context could be used, in fact, as an argument? I mean, the lack of context.
Yeah.
To keep the bias, in fact. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So back then, that was an acceptable term. So then so if you contextualize it, then you can still continue using that. You don't have to replace that term with its contextualizing can sometimes have an adverse effect in getting rid of the bias. Does that make sense?
Yes, but in the project, maybe Sophie or Kerstin, you can more speak about it. But there is there is this question of identify from putting into a context and identify a better description. I mean, that can be used, suggesting, in fact, other description. So it's not only putting context like this, but trying to identify another, the good, let's say, the acceptable, not offensive term to be used. No.
Yeah, but if I may jump in,
Yeah.
but this is not possible in many cases. So that sometimes a word is just contentious and there's no way to describe it differently. But sometimes when it works, we have also suggestions for alternative terms.
And my comment was not about what the Bias Project is doing, but in some cultural discourse, sometimes this context is activated to argue that we have to keep those terms. Just
yeah, from a historical perspective, being true to historicity, and that's an argument we hear often, and we have this discussion also in our group. But the fact that we are not working with data at source, so for us, that's the only way to work with terms. We can only contextualize them. There is no way to remove or use different terms because, as I said, we are aggregators, most of us. We are not working with data at source. But of course, I think the idea is, and that's our one of our main goals, that institutions take this up, and when they catalog data anew, that they use better terms, more appropriate terms.
Maybe we can move to the next question.
Yep. So this is kind of an open question or a half open question, so to say, where you can either put in your own feedback or you can already vote on some of the suggested terms that are, of course, coming from the project background. But I think we would also be interested in getting any additional submissions. And as usual with these kind of word clouds, the size of the terms showing up indicates kind of how often they've been voted on. So I think we'll just give that a little bit to see. Yeah. All of the aspects mentioned. Yeah, definitely a good point. I think that's also something that we've seen in the project, that it's essentially a mix of things and approaches that you will have to employ.
Yes, very much appreciating here the nuance brought by the humane AI tools. It's not only about having tools and processes that have still a human somewhere in the loop, but also AI that is really tuned to the human history topics that we're dealing with in cultural heritage. So here is some work, I believe, for the sector to be done to make sure that AI is trained also on the right data, the data that make solutions really fit for these struggles that we are facing. In any case, the community feedback is quite a huge topic here, so that's clearly a focal point that we do share here in this group. But I'm surprised also with the importance adhered to staff training. Of course, it is key, so no organization will be able to implement a successful holistic debiasing strategy if the staff is not on board of why this is important and how it can be achieved. So very much appreciating that this impression is shared by the participants here.
And it would be interesting to know about staff training. What do all of us do you mean? Is it staff training related to engaging with communities or and on the use of artificial intelligence tools, or is it about training about the topic itself of biases? And it would be interesting to know, is it about technical training technicals or more in general with the community engagements, etc.? Yeah. Okay.
I also like that some people really suggested to just get things going. So the reference to the case studies as well as establishing a community of practice, that really refers to a hands-on approach where, yeah, in some cases it is so complex. We heard Kat Somers say earlier that they're taking baby steps. They're even taking these steps at a photo museum while realizing that maybe their plan is not perfect or maybe there will be barriers along the way. But I think it's also so important to get some initiatives on the road, right? That's a key part of our learning process as a sector when it comes to dealing with highly sensitive and complex matters like bias in collections.
Yeah, and also from your answers, that it seems also that and we do believe this, but it would be very important having a place for the institutions, the professionals to exchange. I mean, all along the process, all together. We've seen some working groups in different countries and some institutions grouping together and deciding, working together on this topic of identifying bias. And it's also an important element to be able to exchange together between the professionals about I mean, the challenges or the barriers or the different solutions, etc. On this topic, and maybe we miss a community, community working on this between the professionals and be able to exchange together all along the process.
This is something we maybe could consider, Corinne, in the context of Europeana and the data space.
Yes.
Where, already 7 communities have been established over the past couple of years.
Yes, the inclusion one with Kirsty.
Yes. Yeah, the inclusion one is actually a great one to maybe establish a working group or something, bringing together different actors within the sector, within the ecosystem, to further reflect on these topics. Yeah, good idea.
Yes, Sophie, we already had this working group before we started the DeBias project. I think it was also the insights and the recommendations of this working group of aggregators to then say, okay, that are the issues we have identified, but we would need, let's say, some sort of tool that would allow us to do that on a large scale.
Yeah, but clearly, Kirsten, the project has demonstrated right back to us that this is a work that could easily be continued. So,
definitely.
Indeed, like our participant Tom mentioned earlier, this is not going to stop. This is a very dynamic field of investigation, changing practices and experiences. So maybe it's worth revisiting that idea beyond the lifetime of a DeBias project.
Yeah, definitely.
And clearly, between the different pillars, mixing the aggregators and the research communities and tech communities and the ENA itself. So I mean, it's very interesting to see that how this topic is so transsectorial. I mean, and trans-domain, and it's really, yeah, very important.
Yes, excuse me, Corinne, I switched to the
Yeah,
next
sure.
question
Sure.
because the word cloud kind of wrapped itself up when we reached 94 terms. So I hope that my visual presentation of this session afterwards will still show us that huge cloud, because that was inspiring. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed also for the additional comments and the links that you are sharing in the chat. So we've now moved on to a question that we kind of touched on already previously in the conversations, and just kind of trying to get a little bit of a picture of what you think would be your recommended way or your preferred way to deal with contentious terms in metadata.
Of
and
course,
yes,
the tricky thing here is, Kirsten, that we are asking this question quite straightforward, while most of the cases of bias will ask for or require or demand even a combined approach. So also having listened to Asli and her, very nuanced considerations, I could imagine that we are now putting her before a dilemma in having to choose between replacing and contextualizing.
Yeah, definitely. And I've also already seen according comments popping up. So yeah. Yes, please, Tom.
Yeah, I agree with the last comment. It was it's very important. It's not a one or the other situation. I mean, I think what we have to do is identify potential biases, identify contentious terms altogether, and then flag them, contextualize them, and give people the option of what they want to do about it. Because in the end, it all comes back to people. No AI is going to, ever basically be as emotionally responsive as a person is, right? So.
But you mean with adding some suggestions, or you would leave it to the content, let's say, content owner?
I think it's
tricky question.
One of the area that I'm particularly interested in here is it might be a little bit off to one side here, but it's to do with having people involved in content, and basically being able for curators to have the ability to generate, how can I put it, immersive experiences for the public or for anyone who's interested in the content. And from there, you have a situation where people can react. So people are involved. They're not viewers anymore. They're participants, right? I think this is the future of probably, certainly of many forms of communication, right? So, and that will, but it's important to contextualize things for people. If you, this is one of the things we were talking about earlier, is we are in a situation where we are human beings. We live in a dynamic social situation where, 50 years ago, people did not think things were a problem in the way we do today, right? And that will continue to be the case. We will change over time, all the time. I do not want to destroy records. That's one of the things we should never do. But we have to look at what is acceptable, what is not acceptable today, and then we contextualize it within the norms that we are looking at. But people need to be made aware of this, that at this particular time, people spoke like this.
Yeah, the historicity is very important. I mean, it's really very important.
Because otherwise we're distorting history, you know.
Yes.
And we can't do that. So we have to have a situation where it is up to, I think there's actually an educational and very valuable part to this, which is for people to see how things were, you know, and how things were expressed by other people at other times, and be able to say, well, this was really unacceptable and this was horrible, you know, or this was absolutely brilliant, you know, and why don't we do this again now, you know, this sort of stuff. So it all depends on, I'm not saying everything is dependent on viewpoint, because there are, you know, humanitarian norms which we do not want to make banal or commonplace. But what we want to do is to contextualize whatever the participant is experiencing. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And it's really very important also, because if we think about the students or the young generations and during when they are at school or university, whatever, they're looking for some collections, and it's important that they have some flags, you know, alert on collections. Otherwise, yes, they can have false informations, or they can, I mean, I think it's really very important also when we think about the young generations going on collections for different purposes, for their studies, etc. I think it's really important to help them also to get awareness about all those issues and have proper information. Otherwise, they can find terms and think it's normal, you know. So I think it's very important for also civic purposes.
Yeah, exactly. It's extremely important, and we're in a world where everybody can access everything all the time, and much of what is being accessed is being curated by not necessarily who we want it to be curated by, but that's not, we don't have a choice anymore, right? There's, you know, we have a situation where anybody can curate anything on the internet, and what we need to be able to do is, with the collections we are talking about, being able to hopefully prevent them being badly used, but also to somehow build into them ways of debunking bad actors. That's really what I'm thinking of. Right?
Can I ask a question, actually, to the bias group?
Yes, please.
In one of the earlier presentations of this project that I attended, I think 2 years ago, there was an idea to like mask problematic terms, not necessarily erase them, but to sort of like mask them like sensitive content, and then the replaced the new term would be on top. But if any researcher or a student, someone interested in how it was originally, you know, described, or the original title with the problematic term, then they would just click and then it would show up. So I think I thought it was a really brilliant solution to tackle this dynamic or this dilemma of, we don't want to erase, because that means erasing a certain historic violence from history. We don't want that. That should be there because there's a reason these terms were used. Otherwise, we're whitewashing all the, you know, like colonial violence and epistemic violence. So of course, they should be there and they should be contextualized. But the real dilemma is, are we reproducing them or recirculating them by continuing using them, or continuing, their existence in a way? Or how do we tackle the problem? Like, how do we make sure that these problematic terms do not continue circulating? Like, we don't reproduce, we don't participate in the reproduction of that discourse today. And that's our responsibility.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, like, what is that still an idea to use that layering? Because I thought it was also like a beautiful approach and solution to this dilemma. So that's my question to the
Can
team.
I come in on this just for a sec? There's a, you know, there's a lot of work being done in this area. and there's a very interesting case study of an exhibit which actually addressed something of what you just said. It's called Congo VR. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a research project under the auspices of FilmEU, done between colleges or researchers in Belgium,
At the
Ireland.
Leuven University, Tom, we are indeed a partner in
That's
this
right.
project. Yes, and exploring actually whether we can build a follow-up project to the Congo VR. So thank you very much for mentioning it.
I think it's a very, very important project, and the whole idea of it is to reproduce. So in terms of reproduction of using content, I just tried to explain. Maybe I'm not the best person to explain this, but I'll just try it, and please correct me if I'm making mistakes here. But what they did was they took an exhibition, a part of the Great Exhibition of 1913, and added it, reproduced it in virtual reality. Now, in its original, it was in a rotunda pavilion where, it was 1913 version of a surround experience where there was a painting that
a panorama or a panopticon, I believe, as it was called. Yes.
Yeah, the Panorama du Congo. Yeah. So it was, but it was very, very, it was commissioned for colonial purposes, and its whole, what I say, the intent of the authorities was propaganda in favor of colonialism. However, the artists themselves went on site. They did very great, very interesting work in researching it, and what they reproduced was the way it was presented in the pavilion was definitely propaganda, but there were clues in the painting itself that belied some of that propaganda. Now, some of the people who were at the time working or visiting the Congo, whether they were missionaries or whether they were health workers or they were there for humanitarian reasons in other ways, were reporting very different information about what was going on there. So what this project did was it decided to represent the original exhibition in a virtual reality context, but at the same time inform it and contextualize it with contributions from Congolese artists today, people who were descendants of people who were there at the time. Some, I believe, there are even some contributions by people who were alive at the time. So, and what it does is it actually the whole intent here is to decolonialize, or depropagandize, if you like, this exhibition. So it was a very interesting approach to, looking at bias in our cultural heritage. That's all I wanted to say. Please, Sophie, you are probably much more expert in this than I. But please.
No, thank you, Tom. I think you described it eloquently and very vividly. I can maybe only add also for Asli, even though it doesn't exactly represent the use case on which you were asking for our response. But the Congo VR is also interesting because it allowed for users or participants in the immersive experience, so in the metaverse, as it were, to add their own embodied annotation. So you could actually, in the metaverse, interact with this huge panorama by adding notes to it or adding your personal viewpoints or even draw on the drawings. I mean, it was a layered dialogue with different stakeholder groups. through that work of art. And I agree with you, Asli, if we could have achieved this also in terms of metadata, kind of layering it with meanings that reflect different perspectives and viewpoints, that would have been absolutely brilliant. I'm afraid that this 2-year project didn't quite get us to that point. That would have
Much
been
longer.
amazing. Yeah, it would have taken much longer. But as we are putting pieces of the puzzle together, projects like DBias, like Congo VR, and similar initiatives, I think we are accelerating the pace with which and the subtlety with which we are addressing these matters, and that should be something that leaves us in the end quite hopeful and ambitious, as Tom said. It's a problem that won't ever be truly solved, but there is a lot that we can do.
Life will never truly ever be solved. We just have to keep on living.
Maybe also to add to Kerstin's answer to Asli. So we also presented the way how we would like to flag and present the flagged terms on Europeana to the advisory board, and they were also very much in favor for the solution that we have chosen. But in fact, going a bit further, as Tom and Sophie described with the Congo VR project, that would be, of course, great if we can come up with a follow-up project. We can tackle all these open questions and improvements.
Yeah, you dropped out there at the end a little bit, Kerstin, but I think we got the gist of it. Maybe Tom or Sophie, if you have a link that you can share with everyone in the chat about the Congo VR project, that would be nice. Otherwise, I would suggest we move on to the next question, because that looks specifically at this question of how could we design an inclusive user interface? I think
wait a minute.
Skipping one question.
Yes, let me browse a little bit, Kerstin, because we had one specifically about the interface. It's this one that asks for a kind of a different interaction from our participants. So we will first ask you to go and write down one or more ideas for inclusive user interfaces that allow better access to, or that somehow curate or guide access to sensitive collections. Afterwards, you can send these post-its to this node board. You can place them at a specific spot in the node board, and then our moderators will pick one or more out that we can discuss among us. And as you send or share your post-its with us, we will see the number at the bottom of the screen. In the middle, we will see it grow. So far, I see no posts yet. I hope the writing is not too cumbersome for you. Can sometimes be a bit tricky on small phone screens, but a few words are enough, so we can take the discussion from there on.
We don't see your screen no more.
Yeah, we do.
Ah, okay, it's me. It's my computer, sorry.
And the first note is in. Thank you for that. Yes, if anyone else is having problems seeing my screen or interacting with the post-its, please jump in or throw your hand in the air. We're here to assist. Maybe awaiting a couple of more post-its. It would be interesting, Kirsten, if I can question you maybe for a moment, to revisit our experiences in the bias, looking for solutions for the user interface. Because if I can speak from a personal point of view, this was definitely something I underestimated. It has its own intricacies in terms of design, in terms of expected user interactions, in terms also of really respectfully opening a door towards raising awareness, inspiring dialogues, and so on, but not alarming or alerting users from actually going into the metadata and exploring the issue. How do you remember our early work in this?
Yeah, I think we, as you said, have jumped around a bit in terms of getting our heads around this question. And I think there, of course, were kind of things like, should there be kind of a general disclaimer or content warning displayed on the page? On which page would that show? Does that show on the general entry page? I know that, for example, in the context of the national aggregator in Australia, Trove, they have a content warning directly when you enter their homepage. But there, of course, are also other kind of solutions out there where that only kind of specifically popping up in the cases where it applies. I think we also had different kind of variations of what Kerstin showed earlier on her slides with regard to how obvious we should make kind of the debias logo that indicates that there is something that you can kind of then click on and get more information about. So should that be kind of using the colors of the debias logo? We have now kind of decided for a more subtle version to also not kind of interfere more generally with the user interface. And I think that's probably the trickiest thing from my memory that we had in these conversations, that we, on the one hand, of course, wanted to have that extension and have that possibility for users to become aware of the problematic aspects around certain terminology and to learn more about it, and to hopefully then also kind of be proposed with alternative terms that they can use in their own language, but also for searching and kind of reusing the materials. And on the other hand, having an already established user interface that fulfills so many other functionalities. So kind of balancing these two, I think, was also a tricky thing for us.
In the meantime, thank you all very much for sending quite an impressive amount of post-its to the screen. I also opened now the option for you to place them somewhere on this board. I want to apologize to the person with this blue post-it, because I took the liberty already to group it together with another post-it that kind of expressed exactly the same idea. And if I may, I will also cluster this one. All are about the content warnings to be, clearly defined, specific as possible, and depending upon specific types of bias retrieved in collections or connected to items. So that is a very, very clear group of recommendations. Let us see what we can take from this board as well. Best practices and frequently asked questions. I think that's a very good one that we've seen in quite a few similar projects. They present some of their findings, recommendations, and decision-making processes in such an explanatory section of the website. I wholeheartedly agree that this also helps to give context to whatever interaction there might have been with historical materials. I will kind of also try to that's not really opening. Okay, normally I should be able to open this post-it because I see a couple of mentions of contextualization. So in different respects with maybe even feedback options, linking to external resources that could all go under adding layers of meaning and context. Thank you for that. Allowing multiple narratives, exactly.
But I think the one that is currently kind of, at least on my screen, has a red around it. Notes fields to provide context as action has been or might be taken. I think that's also an important one, and I think that also kind of relates back to things that we were discussing, that in terms of kind of raising awareness and being transparent about what we do, that is also an important point, I think. So if you decide to kind of replace a certain term with another term, it might still be worth kind of either at least internally, but maybe also externally, speak about that. And kind of explain why you have removed terms, because I think that's another way to contextualize. So there's one way to contextualize by keeping the term in there and providing additional information around it and alternatives. But there might also be the possibility to contextualize to say, okay, we have removed the term here because it was not appropriate anymore. It was kind of contentious. It was harmful. And therefore, we are now using more appropriate language without necessarily kind of mentioning the terms. I think that's maybe kind of also a balance in this.
Thank you very much. May I remind our participants to place also their final post-it somewhere on the board so that we don't miss out any of your ideas, which clearly are providing food for thought. So thank you so much. This is extremely useful, not only for this project, but also for all the neighboring projects that are happening right here, right now, by different organizations in different ecosystems, which perhaps indeed should go on to form a community of practice. Kirsten, tell me when you think you'd like to move on.
I was just checking the time, and I think so. We've got two questions around the use of AI in bias detection, and I think in the interest of time, I think these two should be the two last questions that we do, because also then allow us to talk a little about the answers that we see, and it binds this back to the overall topic of today. So this first question is, in terms of just how appropriate do you think the use of AI is in bias detection? I mean, we talked about this dilemma that on the one hand, of course, we need the technical support for going through big collections like Rosita was talking about earlier, in terms of the British Library and this huge amount of data that they would have to go through. On the other hand, we've said already that this always needs to be balanced with human input. So yeah, just interested to see how this question pans out and where we end up.
Again, we are provoking, of course, a little bit our participants, since you might have a combination of opinions on the matter, and we are asking you to position yourself in a very specific scenario. In the end, it's a discussion tool. We do want to provoke a little bit the conversation with you all.
I think there's still responses coming in, but in general, the picture, at least in this situation where you have to decide for one thing specifically as your reply, seems relatively obvious, that there needs to be a balance between the support from the AI and the human oversight input in the loop, whichever variations it might take in a specific context.
Yeah, knowing that artificial intelligence is trained with what human give for food, let's say. So
I think that's the other thing, and I think that's also something that we have realized more and more now that we are kind of closing in and kind of putting all the puzzle pieces in the project together and working really with a tool that, of course, the tool can only be as good in identifying the bias in as good as the essentially kind of contentious issue descriptions are that we have included in the vocabulary. So we need to be specifically in context where a term can be used in an appropriate and in an inappropriate way, so to say, depending on where it is used or for what it is used. You need to be really specific in how you describe that so that the tool can identify it correctly. And I think that's just been also a learning curve for us, and hopefully we'll be in a position to kind of continue that work in one way or another.
I'm happy and maybe at the same time almost surprised to see that overall, looking at the different answers we provided and the choices that our participants made, that there is this overall positive attitude towards employing AI to support the sector in scaling up and speeding up, maybe even its efforts to debias collections and to debias the cultural experience at large. So I think this is encouraging, and I hope that many who chose such a quite positive answer are in and of themselves either involved in or contributing to or thinking of a project involving AI themselves. Shall I move to the final question, Kirsty?
Yes, please. And I think this kind of ties in nicely with your last comment, Sophie. This question of supporting the broader sector to take up on this, and I think we know that we of course all would be interested and want to do things like this, but we also are aware of the circumstance that there might be reasons why we can't move as fast as we would like, and so this is just kind of trying to get an understanding of what you think the biggest challenge in implementing AI is, specifically as one of the kind of, let's say, newer tools in the digital toolbox might be.
Yes, with the results we see this concern about a very, let's say, customized tool regarding the context and the national or the local context. And I think the needs from collaboration with also people, experts external from the institutions we are working in. I mean, because we need collaboration with researchers and experts on history, cultural heritage, art history, representations, etc. All the humanities, in fact. So, because this question of misinterpreting cultural context, I think Sophie, Kerstin, you faced it. We faced it. Yes, it's a very big challenge.
And not even the project experience can fully take those concerns away. In fact, as Kirsten said, the deeper we are diving into it and the closer we're getting to actually putting AI-powered solutions into action, the more we realize where not even the obvious obstacles, but even the little hidden snakes under the grass lie. So it's I come back again to what Tom said earlier. We're not going to solve this any day soon, but we're going to get better all the time in fine-tuning solutions to even very, very complex use cases. The only thing is we have to start somewhere. And so this resistance or fear or concerns paralyzing in a way the wider uptake of AI, it's also not particularly helpful. So let's also keep on investing time, effort, and funding in pilots and in prototypes that show what can and cannot yet be done.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a nice also sentence to end this session on, more or less ending it. So if I could ask Sophie to stop sharing your screen. Thank you very much for leading us through this session, and also thank you everyone for your comments and your inputs. As Sophie said, we're going to collate that in a nice way, and I'm sure the colleagues at Europeana Foundation can maybe also share that with everyone when we share the recordings and other materials from this session. If we could have the slide deck back again, that would be great, I think, because there's one more slide that we wanted to show you. This is just kind of the next steps or the things that we still have on our plate until the end of the year, until the end of the project. The first thing that I wanted to highlight, and I'm going to put this also into the chat, is that we've just this morning added a few more things to our project website in terms of what you can find there with regard to resources. So this first one is a set of recommendations that we have created based on all the insights that we have gathered through the different activities. It's not kind of set in stone and like we would say, this is what you have to do and then everything will be fine. But it's just kind of, a summary essentially from our experiences and what we would like to kind of provide you with as an inspiration, so to say, with regard to what the things are that you might want to think about if you're embarking on the debiasing journey in your own contexts. And then thanks to Georgia for posting the general link to the project page. So there is more available on there. So the blog posts, there will be more capacity building materials coming up. You will also find our public deliverables there. So if you're interested in getting a little bit more of a detail input from the project, that is all, so to say, our knowledge hub where you can access all of that. In terms of other activities, so that was already mentioned, we are still doing some final validation evaluation events at the moment, which will lead into final adjustments for the tool before we will publish that as well as a standalone version. That's the one that Kerstin mentioned earlier at the very beginning, but it will also be then included into the Europeana workflow. So anyone of you who might be working for an institution that provides data to Europeana might be in a position in a few months to actually have that applied also to your collections. And the vocabulary will be available as a knowledge graph via Workbench, but also as a PDF document for anyone who is interested. And with this, we are at the end of the session. Thank you very much again to all the speakers, to the moderators, to the panelists, and to all of you for your participation, and I hope you will be joining us also for the afternoon session, where we'll learn more about AI for Culture and their platform, and also have another interesting panel coming up generally on the use of AI. Thank you very much.